beautiful people, welcome back to AIC. If you are new on the channel, my name is Rachel and today I am featuring a guest on the channel, Melanie. I'm gonna let her introduce herself, but just to give you a little bit of an overview of what she's doing here, or maybe just like what we are talking about today, we are kind of diving into the spirituality aspect of this channel, talking about the connection between therapy and Christianity, or religion to be general, but we are going to speak from a perspective of mostly being Christians because both of us are Christians. I met Melanie in church, but she's actually also a therapist, and I'm going to allow her to introduce herself. Can you tell the audience?
Yes. Hi everyone. My name is Melanie and I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I'm licensed in New York and Pennsylvania. I've been practicing for about, a little over 6 years, maybe like 6.5 years. And it's just been a wonderful journey. I have never regretted choosing this profession, but I also understand that there's a lot of misconceptions out there about therapy. So I'm excited to dive into this.
Yeah, thank you for joining us on the channel. And like I said, I chose Melanie because we met in church. We talk a lot about like faith, religion, but we also, I think we had a couple of conversations about like therapy and why that is important. I kind of gave you like, I guess, a discussion of how people back home in Namibia view that and how it's not really a culture unless you're like obviously in the city, or you are more like aware of like things going on and the privilege that you have to see a therapist, right? So I guess the first point is just, can you tell us more from your perspective, maybe either in the industry or just like your experiences, the importance of therapy?
Absolutely. I mean, I think if you look at the past couple of years specifically, right, we've been dealing with this pandemic. Over 6.5 million people in the world have died because of COVID-19. And if you want to put that in perspective, that is like more than the population of countries like Singapore, Democratic Republic of Congo, Denmark. So imagine a whole country out of one of those three, like just population being wiped out. That's about the number of people we're talking about. So between that and I think there's been a lot of political uncertainty and unrest in a lot of places in the world, including the US. And if you put all that together, it can be some days it can be a terrifying time to be alive. And I think that no one should have to suffer that mental terror alone. And I think as therapists, we can help people understand the way their mind, their body, and their emotions kind of work, and help them maneuver that so that they can stay connected to hope. I always say that to my clients. I can't make you happy every day, but I can try to help you stay connected to hope and aligned with your highest values.
That's really amazing. I really like that because I started seeing a therapist myself in like a couple of months ago, and like you said, it's one of those things where you don't go to a therapist to like get your happiness from that, but you go there so that you develop like healthy habits and like healthy relationships with yourself and the rest of the world. I think that's really important that you mentioned that. Yeah, so on the second point, I wanted to ask you, like, how do you build the connection between Christianity and therapy? Like, what are the perspectives that makes you feel like these two are either they are mutually exclusive? Like, what are your perspectives on that, diving into the connection between the two?
Absolutely, that's a great question. I went to grad school in the US, so I have, an American perspective. And I remember in grad school, we learned that, the early kind of, what is the word I'm looking for? Like the leaders in the social work movement in the US, if you're looking back to the 1800s when social work was really formalizing as a profession, the people at the forefront of that were predominantly women of faith. If you want to look it up, in particular, one woman was Jane Addams. She was a suffragist and social activist and very involved in the early social work movement. I think if you think of people like Harriet Tubman, she is very much aligned with social work and advocacy kind of values. And these were women of faith. And so for me, I stay really rooted and grounded in that a lot of the reason we do what we do today the way we do is because these strong women of faith were not afraid to lead the way. And so that's kind of what I think of when I think about my faith. I think about the foundations. Where did this profession even come from?
Yeah, that's really good. And I also feel like there's this notion that, especially like people of faith, church people, we go to church, we praise God. God is our comforter. He gives us all the peace and happiness, which is true, right? But there's also this notion that I don't need therapy. I have God, you know. And sometimes it's really hard for people, especially like in the Christianity faith, to like come to terms with the fact that therapy is like an addition, not like a substitution to your faith, right? It's like an addition to what you believe in already, because God also, you know, like you said, God gives these people wisdom to like advocate for like mental health, to come on the forefront of all these, like, you know, importance of mental health, so that they can help people who are dealing with that, not just like your. I'm from a culture of people that think that way. I would say not maybe all of them, but there are a part of people who do think that way. So it's good to unpack that. So do you think there are any clashes between the two? Like, are they, like I said, are they mutually exclusive? Are there any differences that maybe not necessarily to say like, yeah, like these are the differences, but maybe a generalization of like, this is where, for example, Christianity, to be specific, and therapy could clash. Yeah, and as a therapist, like how do you, like, you know, counsel people who, for example, don't have any faith, or people who are from other religions? Like, how do you build that line or like boundary, you know?
Sure. So my initial answer to that question would be there absolutely shouldn't be. There shouldn't be a clash between Christianity and mental health. Now, to be fair to that question, I think there's always things about your identity. Maybe it's being a woman, maybe it's your age, maybe it's, you know, different aspects, geography, that could clash when you come into the room with a client who might have a different experience. But I think ideally there should be no clash, because my goal as a therapist isn't, you know, it's not a seminary or a theology classroom. You're there to help someone operate within their own values, and I think this is how we afford dignity to people, and you know, trust that there's common grace, right? That the kindness of God touches all people. That you know, the rain doesn't come only to Christian farmers; it comes to everyone. Because God gives and extends common grace. So I think that there shouldn't be a clash. I really think there shouldn't, if we're doing it right. But I do understand for some people, depending on their spiritual background, or, you know, who's influenced them spiritually, how it could absolutely be a barrier, because they might think, oh, this means, you know, my faith is weak or something like that, or
is it very common during therapy session to, like, you know, somebody comes to therapy, maybe they start mentioning God, or like something that makes you feel like maybe they're a Christian? Like, is it very common for you to either give techniques or advice or any type of counseling that kind of helps them explore their faith during your therapy
Absolutely.
sessions?
All the time. Like, I'll do values activities. Sometimes that has to do with spirituality and faith, be it Christianity or another belief system, or religion. Other times that's just helping someone figure out you know, where to spend their time and energy, and how to make goals aligned with what they believe to be important. But it is very common. I think especially people have never been more spiritual than they are right now, because it often takes times of uncertainty to help us to be open-minded enough and vulnerable enough to ask those questions, the big questions. And so I think that people are more spiritual than ever. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're Christians, or that they're a part of an organized religion, but I do think people are asking good questions and big questions. And sure, if someone wants to talk about faith, I'm happy to do so. We do know it's actually harmful to not meet someone where they're at and talk about what's important to them.
Yeah, I like that. I think a similar thing with my therapy session. obviously when I went in, I was a little bit skeptical to start talking about God. But then I realized that's a big part of like who I am, right? That's a big part of my identity. How I find my serenity, how I find my peace is through God. So like I started talking about God a lot during my therapy sessions, and my therapist started meeting me where I am, like you said. She started like telling me like, what do you do to practice your spirituality in terms of like your faith, you know? And we talk about that, and she gives me advice or like counseling on how to even like further advance that. So I really like that, because you can really meet your clients where they're at. Yeah. And so this is kind of like maybe just from your personal perspective as a Christian therapist, how easy is it for you to put religion aside when counseling? I think you have already talked a little bit about this with your last point. Like you said, you don't have to put aside the whole, but like you said, it's a little, I don't know, you can tell me from your perspective, but from me, I'm not a therapist, but like
you look like one. You look dressed the part.
I'm not a therapist, but you know, who knows. But yeah, I find it very hard when talking about like spirituality to like dig into the fact that I'm a Christian, you know. Like most of my views on spirituality are also deep rooted in the idea that I've developed that through the foundation of Christianity. So I know that you as a therapist, obviously you can't talk about Christianity to someone who's not a Christian, but like how easy is it for you, or how hard is it for you to put your faith aside to meet your clients where they are?
So I'm smiling because my answer to that is that I don't. And here's what I mean by that. I can't put any aspect of my identity completely aside. My experiences, my age, you know, being a woman, none of that gets put aside when I enter into the therapy room, because it's so very much a part of who I am. That being said, I actually think being aware of it is really important. Being aware, oh, I have a different perspective than this person has. Maybe I have a different worldview, or I'm a different age category or life stage, because it actually helps you to be mindful of how that impacts the other person, and how it also might impact you, depending on kind of where they're coming from. So yeah, I would say that it's never completely put aside.
This reminds me of like somebody that I watch on YouTube. I don't know if you know her, Dr. Caroline Leaf. She's
I've heard of her.
Yeah, she's a neurologist, but she's been studying like the mind for a lot of years. I think something she said in one of her videos once, she said that people always ask her like, how are you a scientist and you believe in God at the same time? But she always says that, how can I be a scientist and I don't believe in God? That reminds me like of this whole conversation, because I feel there's also that notion that, I mean, therapy, yeah, it is science, because mind, mental health, you know, all of that. People
understanding how the brain works,
the brain works, the thoughts. And I feel like sometimes the clash that we're talking about, sometimes people think that's the clash, like, oh, science and then there's faith, they don't get along, whatever. But I always go back to that, because at the end of the day, like, really there's a bigger superpower that's giving us even the wisdom to explore the science that we're exploring now, you know. And I think I just wanted to point that out, like faith, Christianity, religion, whatever religion or practice, you know, your faith you are in, it's really also important to like see and create that link between what you believe in terms of faith, and like whatever science that, you know, you are encountering. I just thought that's a really like good statement, because you cannot be a Christian and not believe in science, or like be a scientist and not believe in God.
Right, and it's so important, because your work as a therapist or as a mental health professional is never really done, right? You know, people's problems don't go away just because the sun went down, but I'm not working in the middle of the night, but God is, and that's the kind of the perspective that keeps me going, and that's upheld me through this pandemic, because I kind of see some days where it's like I'm doing a sprint, right, just to get through the day and make sure what I need to do, and show up for people. And then in my mind, it's like I'm passing the baton off to God. Every day I give what I have and what I can, and then I trust that, like, while I'm sleeping, you know, or in the off hours when I'm not with the client, that God is gonna do what only He can do, you know.
And you know, there are times where, like, you meet someone and you know they're experiencing a certain problem, like, I'll pray for you. Like, sometimes it doesn't matter whether they believe in prayer or not, but like saying that as a person, you having that faith, you know, in your own faith, or being grounded in your own faith and believing that your prayer will work for someone else, sometimes is also just like a good thing, right? Like you said, you know, maybe your client's problems won't disappear tomorrow, but your faith keeps you believing that somehow, somewhere, there's someone working for them and someone that could make it possible for them.
Absolutely.
So yeah, thank you so much for that. And I guess the last question is just, what kind of advice do you have for someone out there, maybe who's a little bit hesitant to explore therapy? Maybe they have the privilege to, I know not everybody has the privilege to attend therapy in certain parts of the world, but for people maybe who have the privilege to, or who have been wanting to but a little bit hesitant, either whether it's faith or just any other factors contributing to that, maybe things happening in the world, what advice do you have for them?
Sure. My advice very broadly would be to explore what's behind that hesitance. Is there fear? What kind of emotions are coming up? What kind of narratives have you heard about therapy, maybe from other people of faith, or maybe people who share your culture, or who are in your community? What are the narratives there? Is it that therapy makes you weak? Is it that therapy means you don't have a strong faith, or you're not trusting God? These are all things that are worth exploring. And a couple of ideas I have for this. One is to try to talk to trusted people in your community who share similar values, that have been to therapy, and just ask them, what have their experiences been like? You know, a lot of times people come to therapy and they tell me, well, I felt a lot more comfortable because my coworker did this, or my family member did this, and I trust what they say, you know, because the therapist is a brand new person, but hopefully you can feel a little bit more comfortable hearing from a loved one or friend. And then the other thing I would say is, there are some cultural contexts where this is not the norm. Rachel, you mentioned Southern Africa, Namibia, you know, in different places in the world. I would actually argue more of the world, a majority of the world, it is not the norm to go to therapy. It's just not. Like, if you look at a world map, I think the countries where it's less taboo to go to therapy are in the minority. So I would say a couple of things I've seen for people who come from a cultural context where it's not very normative to go to therapy. One, I've seen people have success going to family therapy before individual, or like going with like maybe a loved one or a spouse, because it's a lot more culturally consistent to have that community aspect. I'm working on the relationship. This isn't just me, like,
there's somebody else with you to go in there
and be a part of the process. And you find that healing in community, and that's more culturally, I think, consistent for a lot of folks. And then the other piece is, very much encourage you, if it would help you to be more comfortable, look for a therapist who maybe shares some of your cultural experiences, or shares parts of your identities, whether that's faith or something else. And I think also that can help make the process, the experience, a little bit more comfortable.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's really beautiful. I think this is really valuable and insightful. I'm glad we did this too. I've learned a lot from this conversation, because I won't lie, not that I always felt that the two were clashing, but growing up, like I said, therapy wasn't talked about. You know, you deal with your own problems, you talk to God about your problems, which is not bad, but then sometimes you need to take a step further and like try to help yourself, or like go where God is like leading you to get the help that you need. So I'm really glad we had this conversation, because it could help somebody else who either has the same perspectives or just not having the awareness to take that step.
Absolutely. One last thing that I'll say that Rachel and I were chatting about before we hopped on here was, it just popped out of my mouth literally, but this idea that faith without works is dead, right? And so if you're coming from a Christian context, there's this belief that just believing in God itself, that's not the whole picture. That's just part of the picture. That there's also things we do to honor and glorify God with our lives. And so coming from that framework, just having faith that you'll start to feel better, your mental health will improve, might not be all that you need. There might also be some action steps, just like we know God's going to provide, but we also go to work to make an income. So exactly. That's just the last thought I'll leave people with. And
thank you so much. We really appreciate that. Comment below if you liked Melanie's feature on this channel. Comment below if you have gotten anything from this, or just let me know if you want to be in contact in any way, and I'll talk to her about it as well. Thank you guys for watching, and see you next time. Bye.